Welcome to Revenue That Compounds, the Customer Growth Blind Spot. In the next hour, Karen Mullins, my colleague at TechCXO and a principal in the executive leadership practice, and myself, Laura Breslaw, a partner in revenue growth at TechCXO, will take you through a journey looking at customer retention expansion and how to scale that within your organization. The customer growth problem is often a hidden one. It exists in many organizations in ways that is detectable but not easily found. So most B2B organizations are running a growth model developed entirely around customer acquisition, when quite often the lowest hanging opportunities, the lowest hanging fruit is sitting in your current customer base. It's the customer revenue that you lose due to churn. It's the revenue opportunity that you miss when expansion isn't realized. And it's where you fail to scale it within your organization by reading the signals and aligning the motions to really support that growth from the beginning of the customer journey on through. You're watching growth, but are you tracking this? There's a $20 million gap hiding in plain sight. Let me get a little deeper into this and explain where that comes from. What does this $20 million gap really mean? It's the difference between healthy revenue retention with NRR growing about 115%, unhealthy retention of about 90%, and even flat growth where you lose no customers and your retention remains steady, but it plays out differently over the course of a 3-year cycle. You can see that healthy customer base with that 115% growth will grow to about 38 million over 3 years. At the same time, the unhealthy customer actually loses ground and shrinks to about 18 million. Even your at-risk customers with no retention issues will lose ground, not keeping up pace with the healthy companies. So the point of this slide is you're going to lose some customers to attrition. Market conditions change, product customer fit also evolve. But at the end of the day, it's putting the systems and signals in place to get ahead of this and then setting up the proactive motions to manage revenue health. There are 3 buckets where these numbers from the earlier slide actually live. It's the revenue you lose, the revenue you fail to capture, and the revenue that never scales. And if you break those down individually, the revenue you lose are those that are disappearing due to a churn, the risk of non-renewal when contracts come up for review, or customers that over time disengage. There's often a gap in customer health and the ability to identify risk signals early enough in the process to get ahead of those points of failure. The revenue you fail to capture is the upsell and cross-sell opportunities that are sitting in plain sight, but often not optimized. And they may exist in individual motions and opportunities that come in to pursue a particular deal. But how do you turn that into an integrated long-term motion where sales and marketing and customer success work together on cross-sell, upsell? It's about telling the value creation story. It's building strong executive relationships, and it's ensuring there's systematic growth motion set up for account expansion in much the same way you set it up for customer acquisition. And the revenue that scales is as simple as what are the intelligence signals around the customer health that you've embedded into your relationship management program. We all pull from QBR data, we have NPS scores, we look at win-loss analysis. But that information has to be shared across teams, and individuals from key go-to-market functions need to operate with shared goals. So pulling these 3 together and looking at the 3 missed opportunities and symptoms is how we're going to set up the next slide. It's often not about individual effort. It's no one team that literally fails to deliver against their goals, but it's the basic mechanics of organizational dynamics. It's the visibility into your customer data, which often sits in multiple databases, can be fragmented, and doesn't give you the opportunity to really measure and monitor the risk and opportunity in your customer base. It's failed processes that are often reactive and not proactive. So that's true for renewals. It's true for expansion. Needing to put in place repeatable growth motions to get ahead of the opportunities to both grow the account and read the signals that show at-risk customers. And lastly, accountability. Ownership is shared across all go-to-market functions. Customer success, marketing, and sales all have a role to play, but sometimes revenue falls between the teams because Their goals and their metrics are misaligned. Now, let's hear what it actually looks like when two people in chief revenue officer roles are in seat and managing against the customer lifecycle. A brief introduction for our presenters and panelists. Nadja Cole is the Chief Commercial Officer at Skilly AI. She's worked across several go to market functions, strategy, marketing, revenue, steering those functions for global enterprises and scaling businesses. She's driving their customer strategy and growth agenda for a conversational intelligence platform that supports accelerated sales growth. In prior roles, she's been the CMO of Volta Charging and was SVP of Strategy and Business Development at Experian. Sherry Sklar is a multi-time CRO and the CEO of Growth Terra, a B2B consultancy focused on revenue growth. She spent over 30 years working across different sectors, advising clients and serving as an in-house CRO in fintech, regtech, health tech, blockchain, and AI services. She was an operating partner at Edison Partners, a private equity firm. There she ran their go-to-market center of excellence for a $1.6 billion portfolio. We're going to start with a few questions, and I'm going to open the first one up to you, Sherry. What are the missed signals you see most often, and why are they overlooked?
Great question. I love that question. Almost everywhere I go, I run into missed signals everywhere. And there's several different categories. I'd first start off with there's the one size fits all syndrome, where a company would be looking at blended metrics. So for instance, you might have an NRR metric where it says, oh, they're 100% NRR. Looks fine, not great, but it looks fine. But when you dig in deeper and you find out that actually it's 130% for enterprise segment and 80% for an SMB segment, that tells you a completely different story. So there's a missed signal just in that alone. And you could be missing huge indicators as there's something wrong in one particular area, and how would you adapt to that? So that's one missed signal that I think is very symptomatic, unfortunately, across a lot of companies I see. Another one is leading versus lagging. How many times have you seen companies where they're all so concerned about the bookings and the top line revenue number, ARR growth, but what's happening underneath those numbers are perhaps a lot of things. And one mistake that a lot of companies make is they're just focused on those top line numbers, and that's all they see month after month. But a lot of CROs, I have great empathy for CROs since I've been one many times, walk into a situation and they make a lot of great changes. Yet the board or the CEO may not understand that by looking at top line growth, it's not going to change month after month in the first 3 months or 6 months, even sometimes. But if you look at leading indicators, there might be a lot that's going on under the cover that you should know about, such as, understanding what are the highest probability leads, what are the highest probability deals in the pipeline, and looking at like the 50% probability, for instance, versus the 10%. It tells you a completely different story about how well that CRO is leading the organization, even within 3 months. And then the last category I thought of, which was just missed signals due to just not understanding what are the growth levers that actually can move the needle. And here's a for instance. Fullcast had a benchmark report recently in their 2025 report, and they said that ongoing engagement with C-suite drives 189% more expansion opportunities. So on average, with complex selling, you're engaging with somewhere like, 5 to 8 stakeholders. And it could be as much as 12. For expansion selling, it's still the same thing. It doesn't stop. So expansion selling is equally as important to implement that same process, and not just for new logo sales. So we need to look at continued growth and development of the relationships at the C-suite, for instance. That's one of the growth levers. So those are some of the ideas I thought that, people should be looking at.
Thank you, Sherry. So, Nadja, we've heard about blended metrics. We looked at leading versus lagging indicators. We looked at, measuring several metrics. What are some of the things that you've seen in your experience that are really overlooked?
I loved Sherry's points because I had
sort of similar points, but from a different lens, which is I always say to people, the revenue leaders that I work with, we are outcome oriented. So we're going to lock into our metrics. And sometimes that's great because you're focused and you're in revenue motion and it's great. But sometimes it makes you be parochial in your thinking, so don't forget to look at your product, your compliance signals, your senior contact signals, like Sherry just said. In terms of signals, you must remember to be in another lane because at the end of the day, we're all in sales. So we have to be talking cross-functionally and you have to be in the other lanes. You represent the customer. And then the only other thing I can say is something that Sherry touched upon, which is shop your own closet. I've been in organizations where I've arrived, and one of the sales leaders said to me, "I need leads. I need more leads. I need leads." And you work with your revenue operations person, and you say, "How many leads do we have?" And then you start to look at the metrics on engagement, or how many touches, or when the last touch was, and those are leads that an investment was made against that no one is getting a return on. So go shop your closet first and then go to the tried and true metrics that you're going to hit usually.
Great. Thank you both. So let's take the second question. The second question, and Naja, I'd like you to begin. Is your growth actually healthy? Are you investing in the right customers? I think those questions often get sidelined. They're critical, and you're looking at any customer revenue growth program.
Sometimes it's easier to answer that question in a large organization. Sometimes, large organizations say, well, but I need to get to the numbers, this, that. Actually, the place where that really, really was evocative for me in terms of healthy growth was at the startup level, which we were the company I was at, we were a high growth startup. Uh, we had one of our primary customers who we adored. They were innovative. They were a big customer for us. They were a delight to work with. There wasn't anything you didn't want to do for them. And so we did. Except for the fact that in the passage of time, what you started to realize was that they were moving in a direction that was good for their business, but that direction was balkanizing what we were doing for them and robbing the healthy growth over in our base business. And so it takes a lot of conviction and fortitude and discipline to meet with that customer and to say, we promise we will support you in every way, but we have to part ways here. To this day, I remember our client's face because none of us wanted to break up, but it was really for the best for all of us.
Great. Sherry, would you like to add to that?
I love your points, Nadia. Boy, I can totally relate so much, and it's so hard to be able to say goodbye to some people that you really like, but they may not be healthy for your business. I would just add that there's revenue that's good revenue, and then there's expensive revenue. And that I think, Nadia, you're spot on. Take a look at your product area as well. Many times I would jump into an organization and find that sales cycle was so long. It took forever for the sales team to actually close something. But meanwhile, it was you could take a look at the margins and see that there was a lot of impact on decreasing margins. And then look at your CAC number and understand that the cost to actually deliver that customer was so great, it's not worth it. So many times I've had to get in there and talk to the product leaders, the CEO, get the first team, your whole executive team together to really say, is this really healthy for our business? And there were many times we had to agree that some of the product areas that we were looking at were unhealthy and we had to sunset them. And some of the customers we were looking at were unhealthy and we had to cut them.
I'm going
So
to ask one follow-up question, which is, you've got those checks and balances in place, but is there a process that you use to address those unhealthy customers? Do you send benchmarks, or is it just the perpetual customer review, monthly, quarterly, whatever the cadence is?
we would have ICP as one of the criteria in which you evaluate every opportunity in the pipeline. And then if your sales managers aren't using that, they should be. Is like, in fact, you should be putting it into your compensation plans. Are people bringing you, ICP connected type leads, or are they just, grabbing whatever they can? And then, yeah, they might be able to sell it, but then you're going to deal with the churn later on. So it's very important to deal with it up front.
All right, great. Thank you both. And now I'd like to introduce my colleague, Karen Mullins, principal in the executive leadership practice at TechCXO, who will take us through retention risk, which is there. You're just not seeing it.
Thank you so much, Laura. As we heard from Nadia and Sherry, the signals are there. They talked about so many of them that they've seen in their real world seats and how they've had to engage across the organization to help identify those signals in creating early detection systems. So we'll talk through a few of them here, but I think a lot of these honestly are pretty straightforward. Engagement drop being the most obvious. When you start to look at how your customers are engaging with your product, if they even are, how often they log in, if they're expanding usage across the team, those are some very easy signals to identify when a customer is at risk for churn. Support escalations is another one. If you're seeing high ticket volume, if you're seeing slow resolution, or if your customers just don't want to engage in QBRs, those are signs of an unhealthy customer account. I think stalled onboarding is one that both Nadia and Sherry pointed to. Making sure that your customers are seeing value and you're accelerating time to value for those customers as quickly as possible will help ensure that they remain customers in the long term. Gainsight recently did a survey that said 73% of churned customers never saw value early enough. They didn't leave because you failed them. They left because you didn't see the signals that they were not achieving their goal. And I think the one that some companies tend to overlook the most is their champion turnover. Again, Nadia and Sherry pointed this out wonderfully in talking about the multiple executive level relationships you need to have with your customers. But more importantly than that, you need to make sure the entire organization knows if those champions leave or those executive relationships change. If you're not on top of that signal, you'll basically be starting over in some cases to gain that customer loyalty. So, what we want to highlight here is, as Laura pointed out, 100% NRR is not success. It's simply just treading water because as cost structures change, as the market changes, you're really going backwards more often than you think. So these are some of the critical signals that you need to be looking at to minimize churns. And one of the best things you can do is identify early on which of these signals are most important for your organization. Well, we don't want to leave you there. We want to help you with some things and some real world next steps that you can take to improve your customer retention and hit your target NRR. What we see in our work is that companies are focusing on the left-hand column of signal acceleration. They've got a goal of moving NRR 3 to 5 points within 90 days. We've outlined some ways that companies focus on doing that, which are wonderful ways, and they absolutely add value. The first thing being to build a shared health score. You need to know who your customers are that are at risk, why they're at risk, and what risk looks like in your organization. You need to be able to surface risk before it's too late. And then obviously create an intervention playbook that gives your customer success team the next steps, the structured responses, and the exact playbook to run in order to save those customers before they churn. We've talked about some of the leading indicators to look at for this signal acceleration. And as Sherry said, you have leading and lagging indicators, both of which are critical to this success. I think where you'll really see the compounding effect that Laura and I are speaking to is when you move to the right side of this slide and you focus on retention transformation. These are not just process changes. These are not just putting people in the right seats. This is about building a system and building an infrastructure that really allows you to see that compounding effect. One of the first things you can do is use the existing data that you already have to train an AI powered risk scoring model. Being able to train a predictive model and understand not only who is likely to cancel, but also knowing that before you get to that risk time frame is critical. Another great activity is to set account level NRR targets by segment. And again, they have to be owned across the entire organization. That speaks to running retention and expansion as a unified motion. Stopping and reducing churn is not a customer success problem. It is an organizational problem. And when you run the expansion and retention together as a unified motion, you'll really start to see that compounding effect. But as I said, this is a systems approach. You have to have the infrastructure that sustains it. You have to build in place the data into your CRM system, the dashboards that highlight where you are, and create that cross-functional operating cadence to deliver on this compounding value. To give you insight into creating an actual AI behavioral scoring model, I want to walk you through an example of when I've done this before. So I worked with a business that was a subscription recurring revenue business. We transitioned from a manual renewal to an auto renewing cycle, obviously in the hopes of increasing NRR out of the gate. But honestly, once we took a look at the lifetime value, we were able to see that we had a higher cancellation rate under the auto renewing model than we did when customers were manually renewing. That was pretty eye opening for us. And I think we identified that because of the processes that were in place. When customers auto renew, sometimes you take your eye off the ball. You don't go through the same motions that you would when you know you're manually going to have to speak to that customer to renew. So we took all of the data that we had, behavioral signals on usage, engagement frequency, support tickets, resolution history, and then usage across the company. We used AI to build that behavioral scoring model. And I will be very honest, this data was in multiple different systems. It was not clean. It took a lot of work to get it to the point where we could beneficially use AI. But what we were able to create was an early warning system for existing customers that reduced our time to risk significantly. Even more importantly, it built us a predictive model so that we could identify far in advance any customers that were on the onboarding stage that exhibited signals that could lead to them being a potential risk in the future. By making those two changes, we were able to increase renewals 56%, which was a huge uptake in revenue for this organization. So now that we've talked about the retention signals that are already there and some ways in which you can start to capture those and better monetize your existing customer base, I want to turn it back over to Laura, who's going to talk you through the growth that's already yours.
Retention protects the revenue you've already got. Expansion is what you deserve, and it's what's sitting in your customer base. But all customers are not treated equally. Not every account gets the same level of support, and success can only be bred with terrific focus. Expansion starts by looking across the client base and prioritizing the accounts. Karen talked about segmentation based on risk for retention. When we're looking at customer growth and customer upsell and cross-sell motions, it's much more around the revenue potential, wallet share, the strength of the relationship, the strategic fit to your business and your products and services, and the engagement signals that you have in understanding how you can potentially grow and serve that customer over time. The scoring process can be weighted a number of different ways. I've presented a model that I've used in the past that looks across the 5 dimensions, assigns a score that all your go-to-market functions can evaluate and determine which part of the portfolio accounts get assigned to. In the past and with current clients, I tend to look at account portfolios at 3 levels. Your strategic accounts are your low-hanging fruit and your biggest opportunities. They often have high lifetime customer value, strong sales velocity, and you count on them for fast conversion and higher deal sizes. In terms of the kind of support and the resources assigned, Quite often, you'll have one-to-one dedicated account support, either from a relationship or customer success team. It could be supported by marketing as well in terms of the account-based marketing motions that they generate around the product and product sale opportunities. And you also support those accounts with tremendous insight, personalization of programs, and tight alignment with the sales and customer success team. Your second primary tier is the growth segment. Those are still healthy, good customers, but they're more for wallet share expansion, less of the immediate short term impact, more the opportunity to grow and steal market share from your competitors over time. This represents a balance of account based marketing support with digital motions, as well as high touch support that comes from the sales and marketing team, but working very closely together. The third and most important in terms of reach is the emerging customer base, which often has high potential and can be equated more often to your customer acquisition motions, which is how to acquire more MQLs, SQLs, but develop programmatically, often with scaled digital motions. You set up these campaigns to improve visibility, source more leads. These are more of a self-serve model that are not necessarily supported in the same way by the sales and marketing organization. But over the long term and with dedicated support over time, the goal is to move a lot of those emerging accounts into the top two tiers. I look at customer expansion as an operating system. It could have many different buckets to take you through the customer lifecycle journey. But ultimately, it comes down to four key categories and setting those up with a few pilots. Those moves can then scale across your customer base and become repeatable motions. The first one we talked about previously on the slide, which was looking at the account health, mapping the prioritization of those accounts, and going deep into the relationships you have. Since the base is tiered, it's looking at the buyers, creating buyer personas, looking across buying centers, which we heard about from our CROs in earlier discussions, and prioritizing growth plays against each of those buyer personas and multiple influencers. Those get ramped up quickly, and the opportunity that then presents itself is how to take some of those motions and turn them into convertible opportunities. The second stage is how to convert those opportunities into active motions, ranking the opportunities by stage, the same thing you would do in a customer acquisition motion. Standing up the digital campaigns alongside the sales outreach and putting together a more integrated nurture sequence to both reach and convert those warm leads and supporting it with additional face-to-face contact, customized events, benchmarking survey data, and lots of ways to directly engage with your most valuable clients. The outcome you hope to drive from that is an expansion pipeline that's both visible, forecastable, and is going to convert more quickly. The third step is around aligning the teams that nurture and convert. This is about embedding process and governance and ensuring that you're looking at the same data. But primarily, it's putting in place an ongoing sequence where pipeline is being reviewed in much the same way it is for customer acquisition and ensuring that there is a go-to-market council. It could be a pipeline council that is consistently monitoring data and moving the program forward. And the last step is really committing to customer intelligence as part of your growth engine. That means using AI wherever possible, but pulling in sources that are already sitting in your go-to-market motions. It's sitting in your QBR reviews, your NPS scores, win-loss analysis that follows some major new business opportunities in the assessment that follows. It's ensuring the data is captured, monitored real time, and knowing that it can be used to identify white space opportunity, which again is an easily developed AI function for monitoring signals and improving personalization. In this program, you could easily expect to see revenue increases of 5 to 8% and reducing your cost to serve in less than 12 months' time. Here's a 90-day ramp-up program. It's not ambitious. 4 moves, 1 system. You can get there quickly. It starts by laying the foundation. We've talked about the importance of account prioritization, scoring accounts, aligning with sales, the internal processes, and building an intelligence engine. The second piece is around creating the content, the creative assets, the tracking and metrics that will sustain your program over time. It's ensuring that you've got the repeatable motions in place with goals and KPIs set across the different go-to-market functions, as well as aligned to the account themselves. Third stage is launching a few pilots. That's ensuring you've aligned on the product, the solution that you're taking to market. You've got the creative assets in place. More often than not, your marketing team will be running targeted ads against those accounts to key buyer personas for visibility, and also amplifying those things with SEO and AEO and other tools to get in front of the buyers as they're moving through their journey. And the last piece is just looking ahead, the account teams, the customer success teams, speaking to the value narratives. What is the value creation you're adding to that account over time? Do they understand not just what's been delivered, but how it's being used, how it's adding value to how they conduct business? And then pulling together your executive teams, community forums, ways to engage across the various accounts to ensure that they're learning from each other and building deeper relationships with your organization. Let me give you an example of this. A $30 million tech services business under new PE ownership was heavily invested in new customer acquisition, but they were experiencing longer sales cycles and smaller deal sizes. As part of the new ownership model, they sought to reset their go-to-market strategy and look across the various revenue streams. Following a 30-day assessment with input from the board and the leadership team, we prioritized and built a new revenue architecture. It focused on updated ICPs, going deep into a few verticals, building an account-based marketing and retention program, and investing in new channel activity, which would be important to raise their visibility around key services that they were looking to quickly grow. We were set up to execute quickly and execute for impact. We created 3 motions, mostly around customer expansion and customer acquisition in market at the same time. We targeted 2 verticals. We expanded our reach into the organization, and we set new sales targets by cohort group. We also aligned the go-to-market teams on lead stages, much as we would do for a new customer acquisition program, and here had clear handoffs and defined deal values of what constituted a sales qualified lead. Our 2 pilots yielded pretty good results. After about 3 months, we had 2.5 times the size pipeline growth over non-ABM accounts that were still part of their key account program, but not nurtured with the same cycle and the same focus. We also saw an uptick in deal value. One of the accounts brought in a 21% higher deal value than they had a year earlier, which was a great testament to our success. I share this as an example of how to re-engineer a customer growth motion that had previously stalled. We'll return for this next session to a discussion with our friends, Nadia Cole and Sherry Sklar, to talk about From Broken to Built, CRO perspectives on how to fix the model. Nadia and Sherry, great to have you back. We're going to pick this up and look at some of the experiences you had in building out these programs. What did better prioritization actually unlock for you both as you were building these customer expansion retention motions? And first, we'll start with Nadia.
All right. I think that the unlock has historically been both at a large company level and at a startup level. Stopping the train and ensuring that your company goals at the ELT level have been defined crisply, defined in a metrics-based way, and defined in a way that moves the business forward. Typically, what happens is when there is a failure to meet sales goals, it's because nobody's very clear on where they really need to be. So I have historically joined companies and said at my joining point, I'm not going to waterfall goals down in my commercial teams that we haven't all built and agreed upon at the executive level. And you'd be surprised when there's organization, when there's commonality of thought, when you can walk into any department outside of sales or revenue or marketing and hear the same three goals, you'd be surprised how much clarity comes to the proposition of caring for customers, growing customers, looking for expansion opportunities, et cetera, et cetera. It really has been a true unlock again and again and again. Now, it doesn't mean that your team isn't going to say, well, that's some big company strategic planning stuff. You'll just have to manage through that. But once there are goals, the teams actually adopt it and make it their own. The best compliment you can have as a commercial leader is when your team wonders when the reforecast or the midpoint is going to happen, and they architect the whole process on a yearly basis. That's the best compliment you can have besides sales, obviously.
Great. Sherry, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, awesome. Awesome points. I totally love what you're saying about shared goals and redefining the vision based on a shared understanding of goals and metrics. That's a secret to that's a secret to nirvana if you can do it. And that means you're an excellent leader. I would say in addition to that, you got to give your team the tools to follow through. So you have the shared goals, you have the shared metrics, you got to give them the education about what it means because some people don't understand. Some people feel like, oh, that's CS's problem. That's not my problem. So you got to get everybody together and be the leader that actually communicates why this is important. Why are we having CS come join us now during the POC before the contract is closed? Instead of after, threw me a deal over the transom. So I will just say that what Nadia was talking about, what I'm talking about really works, taking it down to downstream. Okay, how do you actually implement it? Putting in tools. We gave many times, everywhere I go, I do what's called value-based selling, giving the teams the ability to have a new language around the kind of value, the outcomes that they are delivering to the ICP, developed specifically for that ICP. And as a result, many times metrics that we were able to achieve, where like taking something that might have been a 3% conversion rate and turning that into 70% is huge. Taking a pipeline that was full of fluff, which I'm sure, Nadia, you're used to seeing too. You always walk in and it's unfortunately full of fluff, and you realize that they need a whole new pipeline, and then expanding it 5x, taking, bringing in new logos and bringing in new expansion deals. So looking at all those different types of results, it does work.
Great, thank you. What operating model fixes made the biggest difference when you look across the customer life cycle? And
Yeah.
we're gonna flip it to you, Sherry.
I love that question too. There's again, all the different myriad ways that you can influence the way that growth happens as a leader, as a CRO, blending organizations so that they can work together as a team, bringing CS in earlier, for instance, shrinking the POC, the proof of concept. How many times have you seen a proof of concept that became like a black hole? Many times I've seen, proof of concept stage that was like 4 to 6 months long. How do you fix that? That's terrible. You can't make your numbers like that. So, shrinking that, bringing forward deployed engineers in, having them part of the whole sales motion, pre-sales motion, for instance, and shrinking it down to 2 weeks. That's more like it. I love what Nadia said in the last answer, which is, making your North Star, coming up with your North Star metrics so everybody is a part of that, implementing success criteria. Can't tell you enough, how many times I've seen walking into an organization where there, multitude of accounts at risk. And then why were they at risk? Well, nobody was calling on the right C-suite executive. No one built a relationship at that level. No one actually laid out the success criteria. So these are some of the operating techniques that could be used, and there's so many more, but they really can make a huge difference.
All right, thank you, Sherry. Naja, would you like to add to that?
The only thing I would say is that it's less about operating model and more about a cautionary tales, which is no operating model can survive unaligned incentives. So if you can find opportunities for your fellow departments to swim in the same direction as you, and you can have them participate in the incremental upside of doing so or in the stretch goals. On my teams, we always have what I call a pocket goal, right? Which I suppose revenue people are always classified as sandbaggers to begin with. I don't sandbag, but I do put stretch goals in, which we call pocket goals. And where within the team, we say, how can we motivate the organization to excel, not just meet the goal, but surpass it? And generally, the way to do that is to, as a senior leadership team, say, how do these teams begin to participate in that upside?
I love that answer, and I love all of these criteria. We talked a little bit about this in the course of our podcast today. The importance of those aligned incentives across the different organizations, parts of the organization. All right, one last question for you both. What do you and I'm going to throw it out first to Nadia. What do you know now that you wish you had known earlier that would have gotten you to the result faster?
I would say, at the risk of sounding, not humanistic, which is where my core really is, I think that on revenue teams, at the very beginning of my commercial responsibilities, you always want to temper your leadership between outcomes, which I am always fiercely focused on, and people. At the end of the day, other people buy things from people they like. I don't care until the machines really do take over. That's still the revenue job, right? And there are people who are wonderful people, but in your core, in your gut, that the reason they're not achieving the outcomes is X, Y, or Z. And then you dig in and you try and help them because in every other way, they're just phenomenal, right? They're a great human, this, that, the other thing. But sometimes you're not doing them a favor, and you're certainly not doing the rest of your team a favor. And so as a younger leader, I started to realize that the rest of my team felt starved while we were all helping that person. So I wish I knew now what I knew then, which is just act faster on that. There's always a way to do that with grace.
Talent decisions. I hear you. Great. Thank you. Sherry, would you like to build on that?
Yes, I love that so much, Nadia. Perfect answer. I would say get at it faster. Get at it. As soon as you see an issue, you've got to deal with it. I would also add that, in the early days, and one of the reasons why I started my own company was because there was a disconnect between what companies would do together. Product was operating on its own, development operating on its own, marketing on its own, sales on its own, even if they had customer success on its own. And I personally, as a young rep, when I was very young, lost a huge deal as a result of that problem. Revenues slipping through the cracks because nobody was talking to the customer. Nobody was really integrating and telling us what was real, what was really happening. So I'm passionate about it now. Customer at the center of everything you do, customer impact. So I think what I would have loved to have known then before I lost that particular deal, even though, I was always like the head of every sales organization in my numbers, but I lost that particular deal and it hurt. And it's because there was this disconnect. So what I would love to know now, or what I would have loved to have known, is that it's a revenue architecture problem. It's not a systems or a people problem alone. It is an architecture. You've got to architect it in. You got to think about it intentionally. Where are you going to actually get the growth from, and how do you work together? And understand that expansion is huge, huge opportunity. Fullcast has reported that 56% of new revenue can come from expansion sales alone. So just make sure that you understand where all the growth levers are and go after it.
And as a marketer, hearing customer at the center is just music to my ears. So I think that's a good place to end this segment. And thank you both for your time again. That was excellent. Now that we've heard from our CROs, I'm going to turn it over to Karen Mullins again, who's going to talk about an operating framework for customer retention and expansion.
So everything that we've discussed up until now in this presentation has been about the gaps, the signals that are there that you and your team might not be seeing, and some expansion opportunities that you might not be taking advantage of. What we really want to leave you with is the opportunity and the ability to build a system. We want to walk you through 5 stages that can help you move your customer revenue from random to compounding. These are sequential steps, so they all have to be done and they have to be done in order. No jumping ahead and cheating. But the first one is assess. And obviously that makes sense. You want to be able to audit your customer data. As I mentioned in my recurring revenue story, our data wasn't clean and it was in disparate systems. But it's important to audit your data, understand what you have and what you don't. Look at your data from a win-loss perspective as well as a customer retention or customer success perspective. Go across your tech stack to see what you've got. From that, you'll establish your customer health baseline. You'll really take a look at what makes a customer healthy. Once you've built that shared view of where your data lives, you'll start to protect it. Protecting it means designing the retention system. So building those retention plays and communications, really configuring that early warning system that we talked about, and then obviously creating the assets to support your customer support team's ability to intervene. Once you've protected, you'd move to the expansion motion and really activate growth within your accounts. The thing we do want to highlight here is pilot, test, come up with your protection and expansion strategies and then test them. Take a small segment of your customer base and run these motions with them and ensure that they work, gather data, and then improve before you roll out to your entire organization. Once you've gotten that down pat, obviously measurement and improvement is the name of the game. You want to make sure that you're turning all of this success into a measurable dashboard that can help into the future. As Nadia mentioned, no operating model can survive misaligned incentives. So the most important thing you can do is get your sales, marketing, and customer success teams, as well as your product teams, all on the same board, all on the same page, working from the same dashboard. So here we're just presenting you with an example of a customer revenue accelerator dashboard. This is by no means something easy to put together. As we said, it pulls data from a variety of different systems and sometimes might be manually updated. We're just giving you an example of the types of things that you would want to look at. Obviously, that base customer health score, and then understanding how much of your revenue is at risk, what percentage of your total revenue that represents. And very important is understanding days to detection. How many days do you have before some of these critical renewals happen? On the expansion side, we want to look at the revenue that's available for expansion this quarter, what percentage of your strategic accounts that represents, and then the dollar amount associated with that. We also want to make sure we're looking at those leading and lagging indicators, as Sherry mentioned, looking at product engagement score, QBR completion rate, and then your champion stability, as we talked about, making sure that we're maintaining those executive relationships across the customer organization. How we define those will be different per organization. So keep that in mind. There might be a different metric that makes more sense for your business, and how you define product engagement, for example, could be different for your business. And then we just want to take a look at accounts by maturity stage, understand how successful we've been in terms of intervention, and put all this together in a simple dashboard that really allows us to have that total view of the customer. Laura and I really appreciate you taking the time to spend with us today, and we want to make sure we leave you with something that you can do tomorrow to help you better assess where you are and how you can get to the next level. Laura and I have created a customer maturity model, comes together with 5 dimensions. We won't go through all of those. You can see those on the screen. This assessment will take you through each of these maturity modules and give you a total score at the end. After you've taken the assessment, you'll receive an email that contains the results telling you your current level and giving you some concrete next steps to get to the next level. You'll also have a link in that email to book a meeting with Laura and I, and we will walk you through your results, those next steps, and work with you in that conversation to develop a roadmap to help you grow and begin the process of building your customer revenue accelerator strategy. Thank you again for your time. We look forward to talking with you more about how you can build compounding growth.
Welcome.